The fierce Wyoming winter had shown no mercy that year, leaving Colton Hayes with nothing but calloused hands, an empty stomach, and a name nobody remembered. When an offer came from Martha Blackwell, the 72-year-old widow of a banking mogul who was gradually losing her sight, it seemed like divine intervention, a marriage of convenience that would give him shelter from both the elements and his crushing poverty. But just 3 days after saying "I do," Colton discovered a truth that would change everything. Sometimes salvation arrives in the most unexpected packages, and secrets aren't always what they appear to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The howling wind cut through Colton Hayes' threadbare jacket as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the riverbank diner. At 38, his face weathered beyond his years by sun, wind, and recent hardship, Colton barely resembled the confident Cowhand who had ridden into Pinewood Valley 10 years earlier with dreams of eventually running his own ranch. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the biting February cold. Colton stomped snow from his boots and nodded to Maggie, the waitress who had been slipping him extra food whenever her boss wasn't looking. "Morning, Maggie," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Colton," she replied with a sympathetic smile. "Coffee's fresh." The usual. He hesitated, mentally counting the few dollars in his pocket. "Just coffee today. Thanks." As Maggie poured his coffee, she leaned in closer. "Listen, we're throwing out some day-old biscuits and gravy. Health department rules. It would be a shame to waste it." Colton's pride warred with his hunger. 3 months without steady work had left him dangerously thin. The Rocking J Ranch, where he'd worked for 8 years, had been sold to corporate investors who brought in their own crew. Since then, he'd been piecing together odd jobs, sleeping in a rented room above the livery stable that he could no longer afford. "I appreciate it," he finally said, accepting the steaming plate she'd discreetly placed before him. As he ate, Colton overheard 2 men in the booth behind him discussing local news. "Heard old Jenkins over at the bank is refusing any more extensions for folks hit by the winter. 3 families lost their spreads last week alone. Corporate types moving in from California, buying everything up. Soon there won't be any small ranchers left in the valley." The conversation only deepened Colton's sense of displacement. This valley had once welcomed hard-working men like him. Now it seemed determined to push them out. After finishing his meal, Colton approached the diner's corkboard, where local job postings were tacked on. The pickings were slim: a part-time position at the general store that wouldn't cover rent, seasonal work at a ranch 30 miles away that wouldn't start until spring, and a handyman request for Widow Thornton, who was known for underpaying. Maggie appeared beside him. "Not much out there, huh? Work's never been this scarce," Colton admitted. "You tried the Lazy K. Heard they're short-handed after 2 of their men came down with influenza. Went by yesterday. They're holding the positions for when their regulars recover." Colton sighed, turning toward the door. "Thanks for breakfast, Maggie. I owe you. You've fixed my truck enough times." "We're square," she replied. "Stay warm out there." The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside. Colton pulled his collar higher and headed toward the livery, where he'd promised to help muck stalls in exchange for another night's lodging. The work was beneath his skills as an experienced ranch hand, but beggars couldn't be choosers. Halfway, and there he spotted Sheriff Dawson waving him over from across the street. "Hayes," the sheriff called. "Got a minute?" Colton changed course. Apprehension building. He hadn't done anything wrong, but in his experience, conversations with law enforcement rarely led to good news. "Sheriff," he greeted, keeping his tone neutral. "Relax, Hayes. Not here about trouble." Dawson's breath fogged in the cold air. "Got word you're looking for work. There's a situation that might interest you, though it's unusual." "At this point, Sheriff, I'm not in a position to be picky." Dawson nodded. Martha Blackwell over at Willow Creek Estate. Do you know her? Widow of James Blackwell, the bank founder, only by reputation. She's asking for a skilled hand, someone who knows horses can maintain the property. Her regular husband left for Cheyenne last month when his daughter fell ill. Dawson hesitated. She's offering room and board along with decent wages. For the first time in months, Colton felt a flicker of hope. Sounds perfect. Why the hesitation? Mrs. Blackwell's health is failing, specifically her eyesight. She needs someone who can be patient, help her navigate as things progress. The sheriff shuffled uncomfortably. Some folks might find caring for an elderly woman beneath them. Sheriff, I've been mucking stalls for a bed in a drafty room. Nothing's beneath me at this point. Dawson nodded. She's expecting someone tomorrow at 10. Told her I'd ask around. He handed Colton a piece of paper with an address. It's about 5 miles north of town. Big white house, can't miss it. I'll be there, Colton promised, already calculating how early he'd need to start walking to arrive on time. One more thing, Dawson added. Mrs. Blackwell's particular character. References check out. Colton met his gaze steadily. 8 years at the Rocking J. Asked Tom Jenkins at the bank. I paid every loan payment on time until the ranch sold. No. Trouble with the law. No drinking problems. Good enough for me, Dawson said. Good luck, Hayes. That night, Colton slept fitfully on his cot above the livery, the cold seeping through cracks in the walls despite the extra blanket the stable owner had lent him. Dreams of warm beds and full stomachs mingled with anxiety about the interview. By 5 a.m. he was awake, washing in frigid water and putting on his cleanest shirt, which wasn't saying much. The walk to Willow Creek Estate took nearly 2 hours through the snow. As the sheriff had promised, there was no missing the place. A grand white colonial sitting on a hill overlooking what must have been picturesque grounds in warmer months. Even in winter, the property exuded wealth and solidity. Colton approached the imposing front door, suddenly conscious of his worn boots and patched jacket. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a stern-faced housekeeper. Mr. Hayes, I presume, she asked, eyeing him with thinly veiled suspicion. Yes, ma'am. I have an appointment with Mrs. Blackwell. Indeed. Please remove your boots and follow me. Mrs. Blackwell is in the solarium. Colton did as instructed, padding in his socks across polished hardwood floors and plush carpets that likely cost more than he'd earned in the past year. The housekeeper led him through the mansion to a glass-enclosed room at the back, where sunlight streamed in despite the winter chill outside. A woman sat in a high-backed chair near the windows, her silver hair elegantly styled, her posture impeccable. She turned slightly at the sound of their approach, revealing a dignified face with fine features. Despite her age, Martha Blackwell retained the beauty that had once made her the toast of Pinewood Valley society. Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Hayes has arrived, the housekeeper announced. Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Please bring tea. Martha's voice was cultured but warm, her Boston accent still evident despite decades in Wyoming. Mr. Hayes, please sit. Colton approached, noticing how her eyes didn't quite focus on him. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Blackwell. Sheriff Dawson speaks highly of you, she said, as he took a seat across from her. He mentioned you worked at the Rocking J for many years. 8 years, ma'am, until it was sold. Ah, yes. Another casualty. Of progress, as my late husband would have ironically called it. Her lips curved in a small smile. James built his bank to serve ranchers and farmers, not to foreclose on them. His successor lacks his perspective. Colton remained silent, unsure how to respond. Martha Blackwell seemed to sense his discomfort. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what do you know about Willow Creek Estate? Not much, ma'am. I know it's been in the Blackwell family for generations. That you raise some of the finest quarter horses in the region. She nodded approvingly. My husband's passion. After he died 5 years ago, I continued the breeding program. It's become rather successful, though I fear my condition has made proper oversight challenging. Mrs. Porter returned with tea, setting the tray between them. Colton watched as Martha reached for her cup with careful precision, her fingers finding the handle after a moment's search. "Macular degeneration," Martha said matter-of-factly, evidently noticing his observation. "Progressive and irreversible. I can still see shapes, colors to some extent, but detail eludes me. Reading is nearly impossible. Faces becoming increasingly blurred." "I'm sorry to hear that, Ma'am," Colton said sincerely. "I don't require pity, Mr. Hayes," she replied crisply. "I require assistance, someone who understands horses, can maintain the property, and occasionally serve as my eyes when necessary. In return, I offer fair wages, room and board in the caretaker's cottage, and dignity in your work." The offer sounded too good to be true. Colton waited for the catch. "There is, however, one unusual aspect to this arrangement," Martha continued, confirming his suspicion. "I value my independence fiercely, Mr. Hayes. The idea of becoming dependent on household staff, or worse, a relative seeking to manage my affairs, is abhorrent." She set down her teacup with precision. "My physician suggests I consider an assisted living facility. I have refused. This is my home, and I intend to remain here until they carry me out first." Colton couldn't help but admire her determination. "I understand wanting to stay on your own land, ma'am." "Do you?" She tilted her head. "Perhaps you do. Sheriff Dawson mentioned you've fallen on hard times since the rocking J changed hands." Colton felt heat rise in his face. "Yes, ma'am. Work's been scarce. No shame in that. The economy of this valley is changing, not always for the better." Martha leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Hayes, I'll be direct. What I need is more than an employee. I need someone whose presence here would preclude well-meaning interference in my affairs." Colton frowned, confused. "I'm not sure I follow, ma'am." "My late husband's nephew, Richard, believes I should sell this property and move to a facility in Denver near his family. He's become increasingly insistent. As my only living relative, he could potentially petition for guardianship if he believed I couldn't care for myself." Understanding dawned slowly. "And you need someone here to prove you're being looked after." "Precisely." Martha nodded. "However, a mere employee could be dismissed. What I need is someone with more permanent connection to the property. To me." The silence stretched between them as Colton processed her implication. "Mrs. Blackwell, are you suggesting a marriage of convenience, Mr. Hayes?" She stated it plainly, without embarrassment. "You would gain financial security and a home. I would retain my independence and thwart Richard's well-intentioned meddling." Colton sat back stunned. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've only just met. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Indeed, and I'm proposing a business arrangement, not a romance." Martha's tone was practical. "I'm 72 years old, Mr. Hayes. I have no illusions about what this would be. Separate bedrooms, mutual respect, and clearly defined responsibilities. In return for your help and the protection your presence provides, you would eventually inherit this property upon my death." The enormity of the proposition left Colton speechless. To go from nearly homeless to married to one of the wealthiest women in the county and eventual owner of an estate in the span of a single conversation was beyond comprehension. "I understand this is unexpected," Martha continued. "Take time to consider. The position as estate manager is yours, regardless of your decision about my other proposal." Colton gathered his thoughts. "Why me? You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you might think, Mr. Hayes." A small smile played at her lips. "Sheriff Dawson vetted several candidates before suggesting you. Your former employer at The Rocking J spoke highly of your work ethic and integrity. The bank confirms you've always honored your debts despite difficulties. You've never been married, have no children, and maintain no vices that might complicate matters. Colton shifted uncomfortably, unsettled by how thoroughly she'd investigated him. Rest assured, Mr. Hayes, I've also had my physician confirm I'm of sound mind. Martha's tone held a hint of amusement. This proposal may be unconventional, but it's not the product of senility. I don't know what to say, Mrs. Blackwell. Say you'll consider it. In the meantime, Mrs. Porter will show you the caretaker's cottage. It's small but comfortable. Should you accept the position as estate manager, you can move in immediately. Colton nodded slowly. I'll consider it. And yes, I'd be grateful for the position regardless. Excellent. Martha rang a small bell, summoning Mrs. Porter. Show Mr. Hayes to the cottage, then the stables. He'll be taking over Jackson's duties. As Colton followed Mrs. Porter out, he glanced back at Martha Blackwell. Despite her failing eyesight, she projected an aura of control and self-possession that commanded respect. Whatever he decided about her extraordinary proposal, he couldn't help but admire her determination to remain mistress of her own fate. The caretaker's cottage exceeded Colton's expectations. Though small, it was immaculately maintained with a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and cozy living area. After months in a drafty room above the livery, it seemed like luxury. Mrs. Blackwell had it renovated last spring, Mrs. Porter explained, her earlier frostiness slightly thawed. The previous caretaker was a single man as well, so the space is designed accordingly. From the cottage they walked to the stables, a substantial structure housing 12 stalls, 8 of which were occupied by beautiful quarter horses. The facilities were state-of-the-art, better than many dedicated breeding operations Colton had seen. Jackson left detailed records of feeding schedules, veterinary appointments and training regimens, Mrs. Porter said, indicating a desk in the tack room. Mrs. Blackwell expects daily reports on each animal. I understand, Colton replied, already assessing the horses with a professional eye. This was work he knew, work he respected. After the tour, Mrs. Porter led him back to the main house, where Martha waited in her study, a large leather-bound ledger open before her, a magnifying glass in hand. "The cottage meets your approval?" she asked as he entered. "More than meets it, ma'am. It's very generous. Not generosity, Mr. Hayes. Fair compensation for skilled work." She closed the ledger. "Have you had further thoughts on my proposal?" Colton took a deep breath. "It's a lot to process, ma'am. The job offer alone is life-changing for me right now." Martha nodded. "Take 3 days. By then, you'll have settled into the routine here and can make an informed decision." She extended her hand, surprisingly strong when he took it. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Mr. Hayes." That night, alone in the cottage with a full stomach and warm surroundings for the first time in months, Colton lay awake considering Martha Blackwell's extraordinary offer. The practical benefits were undeniable: security, purpose, and eventually property of his own. The moral implications were less clear. Was it taking advantage of an elderly woman's vulnerability, or merely a practical arrangement that benefited them both? Over the next 2 days, Colton threw himself into work, finding satisfaction in the routine of caring for fine horses and property that responded to his attention. He took meals in the main house kitchen, where Mrs. Porter gradually warmed to him as she observed his work ethic. Martha joined him each evening for dinner in the formal dining room, their conversations revealing a sharp mind and wry sense of humor that surprised him. By the 3rd day, the decision had crystallized. Unconventional as it was, the arrangement made sense. Whatever complications arose, they could face them with honesty and mutual respect. That evening, after reporting on the day's work, Colton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwell, I've given your proposal considerable thought." Martha set down her fork. "And your decision?" "I accept. Both positions, estate manager and husband. The word felt strange on his tongue. "I'm pleased to hear it," she replied, with a nod. "I've taken the liberty of having my lawyer prepare the necessary documents, a prenuptial agreement protecting both our interests and, of course, the marriage license." Of course she had. Martha Blackwell left nothing to chance. "We can proceed whenever you're ready," she continued. "Judge Hamilton is a friend. He'll conduct the ceremony privately, with Mrs. Porter and my driver as witnesses." Colton nodded slowly, still adjusting to the surreal turn his life had taken. Just days ago, he'd been nearly destitute, his future bleak. Now he sat in a mansion, agreeing to marry its wealthy owner in a calculated business arrangement that would secure both their futures. Day after tomorrow, then, Martha decided. That will give Mrs. Porter time to prepare appropriately and you a moment to obtain suitable attire. She reached into her pocket and handed him an envelope. "Your first week's wages, advanced. The men's shop on Main Street should have what you need." As Colton accepted the envelope, their fingers brushed. Despite the clinical nature of their arrangement, he felt an unexpected moment of connection, two isolated souls forming an alliance against their respective vulnerabilities. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell," he said, then amended, "Martha." "You're welcome, Colton," she replied, his name sounding dignified in her cultured accent. "I believe this arrangement will serve us both well." Little did Colton know that in just 3 days, he would discover a truth about Martha Blackwell that would shake the very foundation of their practical alliance, a secret that would transform everything he thought he understood about the woman he was about to marry. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and cold, sunlight glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Colton stood before the mirror in the caretaker's cottage, barely recognizing the man who stared back at him. The new clothes Martha had financed, a charcoal suit tailored hastily by the shopkeeper in town, transformed him from weathered ranch hand to something resembling a gentleman. He ran a finger around the collar of his new shirt, still stiff with sizing. The entire situation felt surreal, like a peculiar dream from which he might wake at any moment to find himself back in the drafty room above the livery stable. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Porter stood outside, her usual stern expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Blackwell requests your presence in the main house when you're ready, Mr. Hayes," she said, eyeing his appearance with critical approval. "Judge Hamilton will arrive at 11. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter. I'll be there shortly, after the housekeeper left." Colton removed a small leather pouch from his saddlebag, one of the few possessions he'd brought from his previous lodgings. Inside was his mother's wedding band, a simple gold circle that had somehow survived his years of financial hardship when so many other family heirlooms had been sold for necessities. He'd mentioned the ring to Martha the previous evening, offering it as a symbol of their arrangement. She had accepted with grace, understanding its significance without requiring romantic sentiment neither of them felt. At precisely 10:30, Colton walked the path to the main house, snow crunching beneath his polished boots. He found Martha in the library, a room that smelled of leather and old paper, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive oak desk where a small stack of documents awaited. "Good morning, Colton," she greeted, turning at the sound of his footsteps. Her eyes searched for his figure, finding only his general outline in her diminished vision. "Good morning, Martha." He still felt strange using her first name. "You look lovely." She did. For the occasion, Martha had chosen a dove-grey dress with subtle pearl embroidery at the collar, her silver hair arranged in an elegant knot. Despite her age, she carried herself with the natural dignity of a woman who had spent decades in society's upper echelons. "Thank you. Mrs. Porter described your suit. It sounds as though Townsend did an admirable job on short notice." "He did." Colton approached the desk. "Are these the documents you mentioned?" "Yes." Martha gestured to the chair across from her. The prenuptial agreement protects both our interests. It stipulates that you will receive a monthly stipend beyond your wages as estate manager. Upon my death, you will inherit Willow Creek, estate and a trust that will maintain it for 10 years, after which the funds are yours to use as you see fit. Colton sat, feeling a wave of discomfort. This seems excessively generous, Martha. Not generosity, practicality. Her tone was matter-of-fact. For this arrangement to work, your position must be unassailable. Richard would challenge any vague promises. Legal documentation ensures he cannot contest your rightful place here. She slid the papers toward him along with a magnifying glass. I've had them read to me twice by my attorney, but please review them yourself. Colton spent the next 20 minutes carefully reading each document. Everything was as Martha had described, fair, thorough, and remarkably generous, while still protecting her interests during her lifetime. The attorney had clearly anticipated potential challenges, addressing them with precise legal language. It all seems in order, he said finally, signing where indicated. Martha signed her name with practiced precision despite her failing eyesight, her signature elegant even without being able to see it clearly. There's one more matter, she said, pulling a small box from her desk drawer. A ring for you as well. It was James's. I think he would approve of it being used to protect his home from those who might not respect his wishes. Inside the box was a platinum band with a subtle pattern, etched into the metal. Colton removed it carefully. You don't have to wear it after today, Martha added, but for the ceremony, appearances matter. The implication was clear. Judge Hamilton might be a friend, but the marriage needed to appear genuine to be legally binding. A discreet knock announced Mrs. Porter. Judge Hamilton has arrived, ma'am. The ceremony took place in the solarium where they had first met, winter sunlight streaming through the glass walls and ceiling. Judge Hamilton, a contemporary of Martha's with a shock of white hair and bushy eyebrows, conducted the proceedings with dignified efficiency. Do you, Martha Eleanor Blackwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, until death do you part? I do, Martha replied clearly. And do you, Colton James Hayes, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, until death do you part? Colton hesitated only briefly, the surreal nature of the moment washing over him. I do. By the power vested in me by the state of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. There was no kiss, merely a formal handshake that seemed appropriate for their arrangement. Judge Hamilton didn't seem perturbed by the business-like atmosphere, suggesting he understood more about the situation than was explicitly stated. After signing the marriage certificate and sharing a celebratory glass of champagne, the judge departed with a knowing nod to Martha. Congratulations to you both. Richard will be surprised. Once they were alone, save for Mrs. Porter, who had retreated to the kitchen to prepare lunch, an awkward silence fell between the newly married couple. Well, Martha said finally, that's done. Now comes the more challenging part, making this arrangement work day to day. Colton nodded, then remembered she couldn't see the gesture clearly. Yes, I suppose we should discuss practical matters. Indeed. Martha moved to a comfortable chair by the window, gesturing for him to join her. Your duties as estate manager remain as discussed. The horses, property maintenance, and accompanying me when I require assistance outside the house. Mrs. Porter will continue to manage household affairs. And our public presentation, Colton asked. Pinewood Valley thrives on gossip. Our marriage will be discussed, analyzed, and eventually accepted as one of convenience. I see no need to pretend romantic attachment, merely mutual respect and partnership. And your nephew, Richard. Martha's expression hardened slightly. He arrives tomorrow. I sent a telegram this morning informing him of our marriage. His response was predictably concerned. concerned or angry? Both, I imagine. Richard believes he knows what's best for me, and this development directly contradicts his plans. Colton considered this. How would you like me to approach him? With courtesy but firmness. You are my husband and the future owner of Willow Creek. He is a visitor in our home. The phrase, our home, hung in the air between them, both acknowledging its legal truth and practical fiction. The rest of the day passed in a curious domestic normality. Colton tended to the horses after lunch, finding comfort in the familiar routine. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, their conversation gradually becoming more natural as they discovered shared interests in local history and politics. That night, Colton returned to the caretaker's cottage, now his official residence despite the marriage. As he prepared for bed, he caught himself absently twisting the platinum band on his finger, a tangible reminder of the day's extraordinary events. Just a week ago, he'd been one missed payment away from sleeping rough in the bitter Wyoming winter. Now he was legally married to one of the wealthiest women in the county, with a comfortable home, meaningful work, and financial security. The arrangement was unusual, even bizarre by conventional standards, but he couldn't deny its practical benefits for both parties. With that thought, he drifted into the most peaceful sleep he'd had in months. The next morning, Colton was in the stables checking a mare showing signs of colic when Mrs. Porter appeared at the door. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her formal address a pointed reminder that their arrangement wasn't common knowledge among the household staff. "Mrs. Blackwell requests your presence in the main house. Her nephew has arrived earlier than expected." Colton quickly washed his hands and brushed hay from his clothes. "How early?" "He's in the sitting room now. Arrived without warning about 10 minutes ago." The tension in Mrs. Porter's voice told Colton all he needed to know about Richard Blackwell's current mood. He strode quickly to the house, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. As he entered through the kitchen, he could hear raised voices from the formal sitting room. "This is absurd, Aunt Martha. A ranch hand? A drifter you've known for all of a week? You can't possibly expect me to believe this is anything but a transparent attempt to circumvent my concerns about your well-being." "I expect you to respect my decisions in my own home, Richard." Martha's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "My eyesight is failing, not my mental faculties." Colton paused in the hallway, straightening his shoulders before entering. The sitting room fell silent as he appeared in the doorway. Richard Blackwell was a man in his late 40s, with the soft physique of someone who worked behind a desk. His tailored suit and manicured hands marked him as a city dweller, though his features bore a familial resemblance to Martha. "You must be Richard," Colton said evenly, crossing to stand beside Martha's chair. "I'm Colton Hayes." Richard's eyes narrowed as they flicked from Colton to his aunt. "So I've heard. Congratulations on your expeditious nuptials." "Thank you," Colton replied, deliberately misinterpreting the sarcasm as sincerity. "Martha has been kind enough to welcome me into her home, has she? And what exactly did you do to inspire such unprecedented generosity from my aunt?" "Richard," Martha interjected sharply, "you forget yourself." "No, Aunt Martha, I believe you've forgotten yourself, or perhaps been taken advantage of by someone who recognized vulnerability when he saw it." Colton felt a surge of genuine anger. "Mr. Blackwell, I understand your concern for your aunt's welfare, but I'll ask that you speak to her and about her with the respect she deserves." "The respect she deserves?" Richard repeated incredulously. "I've been trying to ensure she receives proper care for months while she stubbornly refuses to acknowledge her deteriorating condition. Then suddenly you appear and within days you're married. Forgive me if I question your motives." "My motives are straightforward," Colton replied calmly. "Martha needed assistance managing Willow Creek Estate, particularly with the horses. I needed employment. Our arrangement benefits us both." An arrangement that conveniently includes marriage and, I assume, inheritance rights. Martha tapped her cane sharply on the floor. Enough, Richard. My marriage to Colton is legal and binding. My will remains my business. You've expressed your concerns. Now I suggest you either join us for lunch with civility or return to Denver. Richard looked between them, his face flushed with frustration. This isn't over, Aunt Martha. I have a responsibility to protect you, even from yourself if necessary. Your concern is noted, Martha replied coolly. Now, will you be staying for lunch? After a tense moment, Richard nodded curtly. Yes, I'd like to get better acquainted with my new uncle. The lunch that followed ranked among the most uncomfortable meals of Colton's life. Richard probed his background with the precision of a prosecutor, scrutinizing every answer for inconsistencies. Martha intervened occasionally when the questioning became overtly hostile, but largely allowed Colton to handle the situation himself, a test, he suspected, of his ability to manage conflict. And before Rocking J, where did you work? Richard asked, cutting precisely into his roast beef. Various ranches, mostly in Wyoming and Montana. I started as a hand at 16 after my parents died. No formal education then? Finished high school by correspondence while working. Took some business courses at the community college in Cheyenne when I could afford it. Richard raised an eyebrow. Business courses? Ambitious for a ranch hand. The cattle business is still business, Mr. Blackwell. Understanding markets, costs, and profit margins matters as much on a ranch as in a bank. Martha smiled slightly at this, clearly approving of his response. By the time coffee was served, Richard had seemingly exhausted his immediate lines of attack. As Mrs. Porter cleared the dishes, he leaned back in his chair with a sigh. Well, Aunt Martha, I can't say I approve of this situation, but I recognize when I'm outmaneuvered. For now, I'm not playing chess, Richard, Martha replied. I'm living my life on my terms. So you are. I'll be staying in town for a few days. We should discuss the trust fund management before I leave. After Richard departed for his hotel in town, promising to return the following day, Colton and Martha retreated to the library. You handled him well, she observed, settling into her favorite chair. He's not used to being challenged. He cares about you, Colton said fairly, even if his methods are heavy-handed. Richard has always confused control with care. Martha sighed. He's like his uncle in that regard. James was the same way until I managed to break him of the habit. Colton smiled at this glimpse into her past. How long were you married? 42 years. We met when I was teaching at a girls' school in Boston and he was expanding the bank eastward. You were a teacher? Literature and history. Another life. It seems now. She tilted her head. Richard will investigate you thoroughly, you know. Every job, every relationship, every debt. I figured as much. He won't find anything I haven't already told you. Good. Martha nodded with satisfaction. Now, tell me about the mare. Mrs. Porter mentioned you were treating her for colic when Richard arrived. The shift to practical matters felt natural, and Colton found himself describing the mare's symptoms and treatment in detail. Martha listened attentively, asking knowledgeable questions that revealed her deep familiarity with horse breeding and care. Over the next 2 days, they settled into a routine. Colton managed the estate during the day, joining Martha for dinner each evening where they discussed the day's events. Richard appeared daily, his hostility gradually giving way to grudging civility as he observed their interactions. On the 3rd evening of their marriage, after Richard had again returned to his hotel in town, Colton and Martha sat in the library reviewing the estate accounts. Despite her vision limitations, Martha insisted on maintaining involvement in the financial aspects of Willow Creek. The feed costs have increased significantly since last quarter, Colton noted, reviewing the ledgers. The drought in Nebraska Affected hay prices throughout the region, Martha replied. We should consider expanding our own hay production in the north section. The irrigation rights are already established, Colton made a note, impressed yet again by her business acumen. I'll look into the equipment costs tomorrow. Martha closed the ledger before her, removing her reading glasses with a sigh. 3 days of marriage, Mr. Hayes. How have you found it so far? The formal address, delivered with a hint of humor, made him smile. Less dramatic than I expected, Mrs. Hayes. Indeed. She leaned back in her chair. Richard seems to be adapting to the idea, though I've no doubt he's still plotting some form of intervention. Do you think he'll contest the marriage? He may try, but Judge Hamilton is beyond reproach, and our prenuptial agreement is ironclad. My attorney made certain of that. Colton nodded, relieved. The arrangement was unusual, but it worked for them both. The last thing they needed was legal complications. There is one matter we should discuss, Martha said after a moment's silence. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mills tomorrow. I'd like you to accompany me. Of course. Is everything all right? Just a regular checkup. But as my husband, you should be familiar with my medical situation. It's also an opportunity to establish our relationship publicly. The following morning, Colton drove Martha into Pinewood Valley for her appointment. The town's curious eyes followed them as they walked from the parking area to the doctor's office, Martha's hand resting lightly on Colton's arm for guidance. Dr. Mills, a woman in her 50s with prematurely silver hair and sharp eyes, greeted them with professional courtesy. Mrs. Blackwell, and Mr. Hayes, or should I say Mr. Blackwell now? Hayes is fine, Doctor, Colton replied, noting Martha's small smile at the question. Of course. Congratulations to you both. Quite the talk of the town. I imagine so, Martha said dryly. Small communities thrive on novelty. After preliminary measurements by a nurse, Dr. Mills conducted a thorough examination of Martha's eyes. Colton waited in the corner of the examination room, feeling both intrusive and protective. The progression is consistent with our previous projections, Dr. Mills said finally, switching off her examination light. Macular degeneration continues to advance. I'm afraid there's been no improvement in your central vision since our last appointment. Martha nodded, absorbing this expected but unwelcome news. And the peripheral vision? Still relatively stable, which is good news. You should continue to be able to navigate familiar environments with reasonable independence. As Dr. Mills updated Martha's prescription for her specialized glasses, she addressed them both. Since you're here, Mr. Hayes, I should review the home modifications that help accommodate macular degeneration. High contrast colors for steps and doorways, consistent. Lighting without glare, voice-activated technology when possible. We've implemented most of these already, Colton confirmed. Mrs. Porter and I have been working through the recommendations from Martha's specialist in Cheyenne. Dr. Mills nodded approvingly. Excellent. And the reading system? The magnifier. Helps with short texts, Martha replied. For longer materials, Colton has been kind enough to read aloud. This detail, though minor, seemed to satisfy something in Dr. Mills's assessment. Her manner warmed slightly. Well, it seems you two have things well in hand. Martha, I'd like to see you again in 3 months, unless you notice any significant changes. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Mills pulled Colton aside briefly. Mr. Hayes, a word? Martha proceeded to the waiting room with the nurse, leaving them momentarily alone. I've been Martha's physician for 15 years, Dr. Mills said quietly. Her independence is central to her identity. Your marriage surprised many of us who know her, but I can see it's providing her the support she needs while preserving her dignity. Whatever brought you together, you seem to be good for her. The sincerity in the doctor's assessment caught Colton off guard. Thank you. I'm trying to be. On the drive back to Willow Creek, Martha was unusually quiet, processing the confirmation of her condition's progression. Colton respected her silence, focusing on the road ahead. "It's never easy," she said finally as they turned onto the estates. "Long driveway, hearing that your body is failing you, even when you've expected it." "I'm sorry, Martha." "Don't be. My condition is manageable, merely inconvenient. Many have far worse burdens." She turned toward him, her face partially illuminated by the winter sunlight. "I appreciate your presence today. Dr. Mills has always been concerned about my living situation. Your being there reassured her. I'm glad I could help." As they approached the house, Colton noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the circular driveway, an expensive black sedan with Denver plates. "It seems Richard has brought reinforcements," Martha observed, her hearing attuned to the subtle change in the car's engine as Colton reacted to the sight. "Would you like to reschedule this confrontation?" he offered. "We could turn around, have lunch in town." Martha squared her shoulders, a determined set to her jaw. "Absolutely not. This is my home, and I'll not be driven from it by Richard's machinations." Colton parked beside the sedan, coming around to assist Martha from the vehicle. As they approached the front door, it opened to reveal Mrs. Porter, her expression taut with tension. "Mr. Richard is waiting in the library, ma'am," she reported, "with a gentleman he introduced as Mr. Walden." Martha's hand tightened on Colton's arm. "Andrew Walden, from Chamberlain and Walden?" "Yes, ma'am. He said you know him." "Indeed I do. He's Richard's attorney." Martha's voice was cool, but Colton detected an undercurrent of concern. This should be interesting. As they entered the library, Richard rose from one of the leather chairs, his expression a mixture of triumph and apprehension. Beside him stood a distinguished man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a leather briefcase on the table before him. "Aunt Martha," Richard began, "I believe you know Andrew Walden." "Of course," Martha replied. "Andrew represented the bank during the merger negotiations 5 years ago. What brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Walden? Surely not a social call." "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Blackwell," the attorney replied, his tone professionally neutral. "I've been retained by your nephew regarding a matter of significant concern, specifically your recent marriage." "My marriage is not Richard's concern," Martha said firmly. "When we believe undue influence or manipulation may be involved, it becomes a family matter," Richard interjected. "Mr. Walden has prepared a petition for annulment on grounds of exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Colton felt a surge of anger. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Richard challenged. "A man with no fixed address, no significant assets, facing destitution, suddenly marries a wealthy woman with a progressive medical condition after knowing her less than a week? The court might see a pattern there, Mr. Hayes." "The court might also respect Martha's agency and autonomy," Colton countered. "She's of sound mind and made her choice freely." Martha raised a hand, silencing them both. "Mr. Walden, before you proceed further, I should inform you that I anticipated this reaction from Richard. My own attorney has prepared documentation confirming my mental competency, including assessments from 2 independent psychiatrists conducted before my marriage." Richard's triumphant expression faltered. "Furthermore," Martha continued, "our prenuptial agreement explicitly addresses concerns of exploitation, establishing transparent financial protections for both parties." Mr. Walden's professional demeanor remained intact, but Colton detected a flicker of reassessment in his eyes. "I see," the attorney said carefully. "Perhaps we should review this documentation before proceeding further." "A wise suggestion, Martha." "Agreed. In the meantime, Richard, I suggest you consider whether your concern for my welfare justifies attempting to override my clearly expressed wishes and legal rights." As the confrontation unfolded, Colton observed Martha's masterful handling of the situation with growing admiration. This wasn't merely about preserving her independence or protecting their arrangement. It was about asserting her fundamental right to determine her own future, regardless of her physical limitations. What Colton couldn't know, as he stood beside his new wife of 3 days, defending their unconventional union against her nephew's legal challenge, was that Martha Blackwell harbored a secret that would upend his understanding of their arrangement entirely, a truth that would reveal itself before the day was out, transforming their pragmatic partnership into something far more complex. The confrontation in the library continued as Walden reviewed the documentation Martha had prepared. His expression grew increasingly grave as he flipped through the papers, occasionally glancing up at Richard, whose confidence visibly diminished with each passing minute. "These appear to be in order," Walden finally admitted, closing the folder. "The psychiatric evaluations are particularly thorough. Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Bannister are both highly respected in their field. I chose them specifically for their credentials," Martha replied. "I anticipated resistance to my decisions." Richard paced by the window, frustration evident in every movement. "This doesn't change the fundamental issue, Aunt Martha. You've known this man for a matter of days. How can you possibly trust him with your welfare and your estate?" "I trust my judgment, Richard. It has rarely failed me. Even the most astute can be deceived when vulnerability clouds their perspective." Martha's posture stiffened. "I'm visually impaired, not mentally compromised. The distinction seems to elude you." Walden cleared his throat, sensing the escalating tension. "Mrs. Blackwell, while your documentation addresses concerns about your capacity, Mr. Blackwell's concerns about the hastiness of this union remain valid from a legal perspective." "The timing of my marriage is my business alone," Martha replied firmly. "Under normal circumstances, yes. However, given your medical condition and Mr. Hayes's sudden appearance in your life, the court might consider that I'm still perfectly capable of managing my affairs," Martha interrupted, "including choosing who shares my life and home." Colton, who had remained silent during the legal exchange, finally spoke. "Mr. Walden, I understand Richard's concerns. From his perspective, I'm an unknown quantity who suddenly married his vulnerable aunt, but his perspective isn't the only valid one here." All eyes turned to him, Richard's suspicious, Walden's assessing, and Martha's with a barely perceptible nod of encouragement. "Martha and I have entered into this arrangement with clear expectations and mutual benefit. She gains assistance with managing her estate and maintaining her independence. I gain stability and purpose. There's nothing sinister or exploitative about it." "Noble sentiments," Richard said sarcastically, "particularly from someone who stands to inherit a considerable fortune." "A fortune that is mine to distribute as I see fit," Martha reminded him sharply. "James left Willow Creek to me without restriction, knowing I would manage it wisely. I'm continuing that tradition." Walden, sensing the impasse, began returning papers to his briefcase. "Mrs. Blackwell, your documentation is certainly comprehensive. However, I advise you to consider Mr. Blackwell's concerns carefully. Family estrangement often leads to regrets that can't be easily remedied." "I'm not estranging Richard," Martha clarified. "I'm simply establishing boundaries he seems reluctant to respect." As Walden prepared to leave, he addressed Colton directly. "Mr. Hayes, regardless of how this situation develops, I strongly advise maintaining transparent financial dealings regarding Mrs. Blackwell's assets. Any appearance of impropriety would significantly strengthen a case for intervention." "Understood," Colton replied evenly. "Transparency suits us both." After Walden departed, Richard lingered, his expression conflicted. "This isn't over, Aunt Martha. I still believe you're making a grave mistake." "That is your right," she acknowledged, "as it is mine to make my own decisions, mistaken or otherwise. When Richard finally left, the house fell into a charged silence. Colton watched Martha carefully, noting the subtle signs of exhaustion in her posture. "You handled that masterfully," he observed. "Experience," she replied with a slight smile. "This isn't the first time Richard has attempted to manage my life, though it is certainly the most dramatic instance." Mrs. Porter appeared in the doorway. "Shall I serve tea in the solarium, ma'am? You look like you could use something restorative." "Thank you, Mrs. Porter. That would be welcome." As they moved to the solarium, Colton offered his arm, noticing how Martha leaned on him more heavily than usual. The confrontation had taken a toll. Once settled with tea before them, Martha sighed deeply. "I owe you an apology, Colton. I anticipated resistance from Richard, but underestimated his determination." "No apology necessary. We managed it together." "Yes, we did." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "You spoke well. Direct, but not antagonistic. Growing. A poor teaches you when to fight and when to reason," Colton replied. "Richard isn't evil, just concerned in his own misguided way." Martha studied him with her limited vision. "You continue to surprise me, Mr. Hayes. Most men would have responded to Richard's accusations with defensiveness or anger. Would that have helped our situation?" "No," she admitted. "It would have reinforced his worst assumptions." They sat, in companionable silence, the winter sunlight warming the glass-enclosed space. Colton found himself reflecting on how quickly he'd become invested in this strange alliance. 3 days of marriage, yet already he felt a genuine commitment to protecting Martha's interests, not just because of the financial benefits to himself, but because she deserved the respect and autonomy Richard seemed determined to deny her. "The confrontation has fatigued you," he observed. "Perhaps you should rest before dinner." Martha nodded, conceding to the suggestion with uncharacteristic ease. "Perhaps I should. Would you mind reading to me for a while first? I find it helps settle my thoughts." This had become part of their evening routine. Colton reading aloud from whatever book Martha selected, usually histories or biographies that interested them both. The request in the afternoon was unusual, but not unwelcome. "Of course, what would you like to hear?" Martha directed him to a particular shelf where he found a leather-bound volume of poetry. "Page 37, she instructed. "Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. It seems appropriate today." Colton read the familiar poem, his voice filling the sunlit room with Frost's meditation on choices and their consequences. When he finished, Martha was quiet for a long moment. "I've made unconventional choices throughout my life," she said finally. "Marrying James when my family disapproved, abandoning a promising academic career to move west, continuing the horse breeding program after his death when everyone advised selling. Each decision led me further from the expected path." "Any regrets?" Colton asked. "Not about the choices themselves, only that society so often punishes women for making them independently." She set down her teacup decisively. "I believe I will. Rest now. Would you mind assisting me to my room?" Colton helped Martha upstairs to her suite, noting again how much she relied on his support today. At her door, she paused. "Richard won't give up easily," she warned. "He'll return with new tactics. Possibly as soon as tomorrow. We should be prepared." "We will be," he assured her. "Rest now. I'll handle anything that arises." After Martha retired, Colton returned to the stables, finding comfort in physical work, as he always had during times of stress. The rhythmic routine of grooming the horses and cleaning tack allowed his mind to process the day's events. He was checking the pregnant mare's progress when Mrs. Porter appeared in the stable doorway, her expression unusually troubled. "Mr. Hayes, might I have a word?" "Of course." Colton stepped out of the stall, brushing hay from his shirt. "Is everything all right? Is Martha?" "Mrs. Blackwell is resting comfortably," she assured him. "This is a different matter. Her hesitation was uncharacteristic. In the short time he'd known her, Mrs. Porter had always been direct, occasionally to the point of bluntness. "What is it?" he prompted. "I've served the Blackwell family for 23 years, Mr. Hayes. My loyalty to Mrs. Blackwell is absolute." "I never doubted that." "Then you'll understand why I must speak plainly now." She squared her shoulders. "Mr. Richards' concerns, while overstepping, aren't entirely without merit," Colton frowned. Meaning there are aspects of Mrs. Blackwell's situation you aren't aware of. Information that might change your perspective on this arrangement." A sense of unease crept up Colton's spine. "Mrs. Porter, if you have concerns about my intentions—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "Your actions these past days have demonstrated genuine concern for her welfare. That's precisely why I believe you deserve to know the full truth before matters progress further." "What truth?" Mrs. Porter glanced toward the house, then back to Colton. "It's not my place to tell you, but I've spoken with Mrs. Blackwell, and she's agreed to do so herself after she rests. She'll meet you in the library at 7. With that cryptic statement, she turned and walked briskly back to the house, leaving Colton staring after her in confusion. The remainder of the afternoon passed with excruciating slowness. Colton completed his stable duties, checked the property's perimeter fences, and reviewed the estate accounts, all while his mind churned with possibilities. What information could be significant enough to potentially change his perspective on their arrangement? Was Martha's condition worse than she'd revealed? Were there financial troubles he hadn't been made aware of? At precisely 7 o'clock, Colton entered the library to find Martha already seated near the fireplace. She looked composed, her moment of vulnerability from earlier concealed behind her usual dignified demeanor. "Colton," she greeted him, "please, sit. We have matters to discuss." He took the chair opposite her, noting the folders and documents arranged on the table between them. "Mrs. Porter seemed concerned earlier." "Mrs. Porter is protective," Martha replied. "Sometimes excessively so, but in this case her instincts are sound. There are things you should know, things I perhaps should have disclosed before our marriage." Colton waited, tension building in his chest. Martha removed her reading glasses, setting them aside deliberately. "What do you know about James's banking empire?" The question surprised him. Only what most people know. He founded Blackwell Financial, built it into one of the largest regional banks in the Rocky Mountain states. After his death, the company merged with Western Alliance, a simplified but accurate summary. Martha nodded. "What isn't common knowledge is that I was more than James's wife. I was his business partner in all but name." "That doesn't surprise me," Colton said honestly. "Your business acumen is evident in how you've managed this estate." "Indeed. After I left teaching, I earned an MBA from Columbia through correspondence courses. James recognized my aptitude and increasingly relied on my judgment in business matters. Though publicly he maintained the fiction of the traditional relationship, successful banker husband, socially active wife." "Why are you telling me this now?" Martha leaned forward slightly. "Because it's essential to understanding my current situation, and by extension, yours as our marriage progresses." She handed him the first folder. Inside, Colton found financial statements showing assets far beyond what he had imagined, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and corporate interests worth tens of millions of dollars. "Willow Creek Estate is merely a fraction of my holdings," Martha explained. "The bulk of James's fortune, our fortune, was diversified after his death. The merger of Blackwell Financial with Western Alliance made me the largest individual shareholder in the combined entity." Colton stared at the documents, struggling to absorb their implications. "I don't understand. Why would you offer to marry Me for protection if you have all this? Surely you could hire whatever security or assistance you needed. That brings me to the second matter. Martha passed him another folder. My medical condition. Expecting to find documents about her macular degeneration, Colton was confused to see clinical reports for entirely different diagnoses, neurological evaluations, cognitive assessments, and treatment plans. I don't have macular degeneration. Colton, Martha said quietly, my vision is perfectly normal for a woman my age. The statement hit him like a physical blow. What? I'm not going blind. That was a fabrication. Colton stood abruptly, the papers falling from his lap. A fabrication? You've been pretending this entire time. Why would you— Please, she interrupted, raising a hand. Let me explain completely before you react. He remained standing, his body tense with shock and confusion, but nodded for her to continue. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's disease. The revelation landed heavily in the quiet room. The progression has been slow thus far, Martha continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her disclosure. I have good days and difficult ones. My long-term memory remains largely intact, but my short-term recall is becoming unreliable. The doctors project I have perhaps 2 years before the symptoms become impossible to conceal, and another 3 to 5 before I would require full-time care. Colton sank back into his chair, stunned by this unexpected turn. The vision problems were a cover story. Yes, a way to explain behaviors that might otherwise reveal my true condition. Asking for things to be repeated, forgetting recent conversations, occasionally becoming disoriented in familiar settings. Does Richard know? No. No one knows except Mrs. Porter, my physician, and now you. Martha's composure wavered slightly. Richard already believes I'm incapable of managing my affairs due to my age and supposed visual impairment. If he discovered my diagnosis, he would immediately petition for guardianship, and given the nature of Alzheimer's, he would likely succeed. Understanding dawned slowly. So you needed a husband, someone whose legal standing would supersede a nephew's claim. For guardianship. Precisely. Martha met his gaze directly. I needed someone I could trust to honor my wishes as my condition progressed. Someone who would protect my autonomy for as long as possible and ensure I can remain at Willow Creek until the end. Colton processed this information, his mind reeling. But why me? Why not someone you've known longer? Because you needed me as much as I needed you. Martha's response was simple and direct. Your desperation made you a safer choice than someone with less at stake. And despite your circumstances, Sheriff Dawson spoke highly of your character. He said you were honest to a fault and honorable even when it cost you. The pragmatism of her reasoning was both logical and somewhat unsettling. So this entire arrangement, the job offer, the marriage proposal, the story about your vision, it was all calculated to secure your control over your future. Yes, Martha admitted without apology, though the job offer was genuine. Willow Creek does need management, and your qualifications are real. Colton stood again, walking to the window where darkness had fallen, snow reflecting the moonlight across the property. His emotions churned, anger at the deception, sympathy for Martha's diagnosis, and uncertainty about what this meant for their arrangement. I understand if you feel betrayed, Martha said into the silence. You married a woman you believed was going blind, but otherwise healthy. Instead, you found yourself tied to someone facing cognitive decline. It changes the nature of our bargain significantly. He turned back to face her. Why tell me now? You could have maintained the fiction indefinitely. Because deception is a poor foundation for any relationship, even one as pragmatic as ours. Martha's voice softened slightly. And because, if we're to face Richard's continued challenges together, we need absolute clarity between us. What happens if I decide I can't accept these new terms? Then we annul the marriage immediately. You keep the first year's salary we agreed upon as compensation for your time and inconvenience. We part ways with no further obligation. The straightforwardness of her contingency plan was quintessentially Martha, practical, fair, and prepared for all eventualities. And if I stay, then our arrangement continues with amended expectations. You would eventually become not just my estate manager, but my caretaker and advocate as my condition progresses. In return, the compensation increases. Accordingly, Martha handed him a final document, a revised contract that included substantially higher payments, additional support for training in dementia care, and enhanced inheritance provisions. "You've thought of everything," Colton observed, scanning the detailed terms. "I've had 6 months to plan, Mr. Hayes. Since the day I received my diagnosis, I've been developing strategies to maintain control of my life for as long as possible." Colton set the contract aside and studied the woman before him. Despite the bombshell she'd just delivered, Martha sat composed and dignified, awaiting his judgment without visible anxiety. The strength of character required to face such a diagnosis and methodically arrange her affairs impressed him deeply, even as the deception troubled him. "I need time to think," he said finally. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Martha rose from her chair with fluid grace that emphasized the absence of any visual impairment. "Whatever you decide, I appreciate your discretion regarding my condition. Richard cannot know, not yet." "I understand." As Martha prepared to leave the library, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Colton, these past days have confirmed my initial assessment of your character. You've conducted yourself with integrity in a highly unusual situation. That's rarer than you might think." After she departed, Colton remained in the library for hours, weighing his options. The revelation had fundamentally altered the terms of their arrangement. Marriage to a woman with failing eyesight who needed practical assistance was one thing. Becoming the caretaker and eventual guardian for someone with progressive cognitive decline was something else entirely. He reviewed the revised contract again, noting the comprehensive provisions for Martha's care as her condition worsened. Specific facilities she would consider if home care became impossible, detailed advance directives for medical decisions, even instructions for how she wished to be treated when she could no longer express her preferences. The meticulous planning revealed both Martha's clear-eyed acceptance of her fate and her determination to face it on her own terms. It was impossible not to admire such courage, even through his lingering sense of betrayal at the deception. Near midnight, Colton finally left the library and walked through the silent house toward the caretaker's cottage. The moon illuminated the snow-covered landscape of Willow Creek Estate, the breeding stables, the training ring, the rolling pastures, and the distant line of willow trees that gave the property its name. 3 days ago, he had married Martha, believing she was going blind, but otherwise healthy. Now he faced a choice between walking away from their arrangement with a generous severance or committing to a future that would eventually require him to become caretaker to a woman losing her cognitive abilities. As he entered the cottage, Colton caught sight of his reflection in the window, no longer the desperate, half-starved cowhand who had trudged through snow to a job interview, but not quite the confident estate manager and convenient husband either. Something in between, something still forming. The platinum band on his finger caught the lamplight as he removed his coat, a symbol of a contract, not a covenant. Yet somehow, in just 3 days, it had come to represent more than a mere business. Arrangement tomorrow, he would give Martha his decision. Tonight, he needed to reconcile the woman he thought he had married with the reality of who she actually was, and determine whether their practical alliance could withstand this fundamental shift in circumstances. What he couldn't know, as he pondered his decision, was that Martha's revelation about her health was only the first of several truths that would emerge in the coming days, each one redefining their relationship in unexpected ways. The most significant revelation still awaited, one that would challenge everything he thought he understood about the woman he had married and the true nature of their unconventional union. Dawn broke over Willow Creek Estate, painting the snow-covered landscape in rose gold. Colton had barely slept, his mind cycling through the implications of Martha's revelation. By the time he left the caretaker's cottage, he had reached a decision, not perhaps the most comfortable one, but the only one that aligned with his sense of honor. He found Martha in the dining room, perfectly composed, as she methodically cut a piece of toast into precise triangles. No hint of visual impairment in her movements, he noted, now that the pretense had been dropped between them. "Good morning," she greeted him, her gaze direct and clear. "I trust you slept well." "Not particularly," he admitted, taking his usual seat as Mrs. Porter appeared with coffee. "I had a lot to consider." "Understandable." Martha dismissed Mrs. Porter with a subtle gesture, ensuring their privacy. "Have you reached any conclusions?" Colton measured his words carefully. "I appreciate your honesty, even if it was delayed. The situation you've presented is obviously more complex than I initially understood." Indeed, her expression remained neutral, giving no indication of her own hopes regarding his decision. "I've spent most of the night thinking about what your diagnosis means for our arrangement," he continued. "It changes the parameters significantly." "It does," Martha agreed. "The progression of Alzheimer's is unpredictable, though generally follows certain patterns. I may remain mostly lucid for several years, or decline more rapidly. Either way, the burden on you would be substantially greater than what you agreed to." Colton nodded, noting the clinical way she discussed her condition. No self-pity, just pragmatic assessment. "Your revised contract addresses the financial aspects fairly. More than fairly, actually." "Compensation should reflect responsibility," Martha said simply. "If you choose to stay, your role will evolve from estate manager to something more comprehensive. And if I choose to leave, then we parted ways amicably, with the severance package I outlined. No recriminations, no complications." Colton looked out the window toward the stables, where one of the grooms was leading the pregnant mare for her morning exercise. In just a few days, he had grown attached to this place, to the rhythm of life here, and, somewhat surprisingly, to Martha herself, not romantically, but with genuine respect for her determination and clarity of purpose. "I'm staying," he said finally, turning back to meet her gaze. "Our arrangement still makes sense for both of us, even with these new terms." Relief flickered briefly across Martha's features before her composure returned. "May I ask what influenced your decision?" "You need someone in your corner as much as I needed a fresh start," Colton replied honestly. "And walking away when the road gets difficult isn't how I was raised." "Admirable, but potentially naive," Martha cautioned. "You haven't witnessed the realities of cognitive decline firsthand. It can be challenging for all involved." "I'm aware. My father cared for my mother through cancer when I was a teenager. Different illness, similar demands. He hadn't intended to share this personal history, but it seemed relevant now. I know something about watching someone you care about change before your eyes." Martha studied him with new interest. "You haven't mentioned your parents before." "Not much to tell. Hard-working ranch hands who never managed to buy land of their own. They both died before I turned 18, mother from cancer, father from a heart attack the following year." "I'm sorry," Martha said, and seemed to genuinely mean it. "That explains your self-sufficiency. Necessity more than virtue," Colton replied with a shrug. But it taught me to honor commitments, especially when they're difficult. Martha nodded slowly. Then we proceed with our arrangement, amended to reflect my actual condition. Yes, though I have conditions of my own. Colton's tone became more businesslike. Complete transparency from this point forward. No more convenient fictions. No matter how well-intentioned, agreed, and we develop a clear protocol for how to handle Richard as your condition progresses. He may be domineering, but he is your family. Excluding him entirely seems unnecessary and potentially counterproductive. Martha's expression tightened slightly. Richard's involvement complicates matters. Only if we allow it to, Colton countered. He deserves to know the truth eventually. Not immediately, but when you're ready. And having him as an ally rather than an adversary would benefit everyone in the long term. For a moment, Martha seemed about to object, but then nodded reluctantly. Your perspective has merit. I'll consider when and how to inform Richard. But that decision remains mine to make, of course. Colton recognized the boundaries she was establishing and respected them. One more thing. I'd like to speak with your doctor. Understand exactly what we're facing and how best to prepare. Doctor, Mills has been fully briefed on our arrangement. She can discuss my condition within the parameters of patient confidentiality. Martha reached for her teacup, her movements precise and controlled. She'll also help connect you with resources for caregivers of Alzheimer's patients when the time comes. The clinical discussion of her eventual decline struck Colton as both brave and somewhat poignant. In the face of a diagnosis that terrified most people, Martha was methodically arranging the details as if planning a business merger rather than the gradual loss of her identity. I'll contact her today, he said. Now, about the daily operations. Do you want to continue our previous routine or make adjustments now that circumstances have changed? For appearance's sake, we should maintain the established patterns, Martha replied. My supposed visual impairment provides a convenient explanation for any cognitive lapses I might display. Continuing the charade publicly protects both my privacy and dignity. Colton nodded, understanding the practical necessity even as he found the ongoing deception uncomfortable. And between us, honesty. You'll need to become attuned to subtle changes in my condition. Good days versus difficult ones. Mrs. Porter can help. She's observed the early progression firsthand. Understood. Colton hesitated, then added, Thank you for trusting me with this, Martha. I know it couldn't have been an easy decision. Something unexpected flickered in her eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or simple human connection beyond their pragmatic arrangement. Trust is a calculated risk, Mr. Hayes, but in this case, a necessary one. With their new understanding established, they settled into a modified routine. Publicly, Martha continued to play the role of a woman gradually losing her vision, leaning on Colton's arm when they ventured into town, asking him to read documents aloud. Privately, she abandoned the pretense, moving confidently through the house and grounds, handling correspondence and estate matters with her usual efficiency. 3 days after Martha's revelation, Colton met with Dr. Mills at her office in town, seeking a clearer understanding of what lay ahead. The progression varies significantly between patients, the doctor explained, showing him charts and educational materials. Martha's form appears to be developing gradually, which is relatively favorable. She may maintain significant independence for 2 to 3 years before more intensive intervention becomes necessary. What should I be watching for? Colton asked, taking notes in a small notebook he'd purchased for this purpose. Initially, short-term memory lapses, difficulty finding words, occasional confusion about time or place. She may repeat questions or stories, forget recent conversations or misplace items. As the disease advances, these symptoms will become more pronounced and frequent. Dr. Mills studied him with professional assessment. "You seem to be taking this very seriously, Mr. Hayes." "It is serious," he replied simply. "Yes, but many spouses, particularly in arrangements like yours, might approach this more pragmatically." Colton met her gaze directly. "My arrangement with Martha is based on mutual benefit, Doctor. That doesn't preclude genuine concern for her welfare." Dr. Mills nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. "Martha is fortunate in her choice of partner then. Many patients with her diagnosis face their decline with far less support." As Colton drove back to Willow Creek, he reflected on the doctor's words. His decision to stay had been primarily driven by a sense of honor and the practical benefits of their arrangement. Yet already, he found himself genuinely invested in Martha's well-being, beyond the terms of their contract. Upon returning to the estate, he found Martha in the stables, observing one of the grooms working with a spirited 2-year-old colt. She turned as he approached, a slight smile acknowledging his presence. "How was your meeting with Dr. Mills?" she asked without preamble. "Informative," Colton replied. "She provided resources and guidance for the coming months." "Good. I've always believed in facing difficulties with complete information." Martha returned her attention to horse training. "The Jensen auction is next month. This fellow should fetch a good price if his training continues well." The abrupt change of subject was deliberate, Martha's way of establishing that her condition wouldn't dominate their interactions. Colton respected the boundary and followed her lead. "He has excellent conformation," he agreed, assessing the young horse with a professional eye. "Solid bloodlines, too. Have you considered keeping him as a stud prospect?" They discussed breeding strategies and auction preparations for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing naturally between them. It was only later, as they walked back to the house, that Martha returned to more personal matters. "Richard called while you were in town," she said. "He's returning to Denver tomorrow, but plans to visit again in 2 weeks. Did he mention the lawyer or any further legal action?" "No, though I suspect he's merely regrouping. Richard rarely abandons a course once set upon it." Martha paused at the garden gate. "He's invited us to dinner tonight. A peace offering." "Supposedly." Colton raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to accept?" "I think we must. Refusing would only deepen his suspicions." She glanced up at him. "Are you comfortable with that? It may involve more acting on your part." "I can manage dinner with your nephew," Colton assured her. "What's our approach? Newlywed bliss or practical partnership?" A hint of amusement crossed Martha's face. "I believe practical partnership closer to the truth would serve us best. Richard is many things, but not a fool. Attempting to convince him we're madly in love would strain credibility beyond reasonable limits." That evening, at the Pinewood Valley Inn's restaurant, the finest establishment in the small town, Colton found himself seated across from Richard. Blackwell in what could only be described as a diplomatic summit, disguised as a family dinner. Martha, immaculate in a navy silk dress with subtle pearl accents, maintained her visually impaired persona flawlessly, occasionally asking Colton to describe menu items or identify people who greeted them. Richard watched these interactions with thinly veiled skepticism. "The community seems quite intrigued by your marriage," he observed. "Mrs. Palmer nearly dislocated her neck, turning to stare when you entered." "Small towns thrive on novelty," Martha replied serenely. "They'll find something new to discuss soon enough." "Perhaps." Richard took a deliberate sip of his wine. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. While I still have reservations about the hastiness of your union, I recognize that challenging it directly may be counterproductive." Colton exchanged a quick glance with Martha, sensing a tactical retreat rather than a genuine change of heart. "That's very sensible." "Richard," Martha said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, even when I disagree with your approach." Family remains family, Richard replied. Which brings me to a proposal. Emily and I would like to invite you both to Denver next month. A proper introduction to the family, get to know Colton better in more relaxed environment. The invitation was clearly a reconnaissance mission, an opportunity for Richard to assess Colton and their relationship more thoroughly. Yet refusing would only heighten suspicions. That's very thoughtful, Martha said before Colton could respond. We'll need to check the breeding schedule, of course. The spring foaling season requires close attention. Of course, Richard smiled thinly. But surely a weekend away could be managed. Family is important after all. Indeed it is, Colton interjected smoothly. And Martha has spoken highly of Emily and your children. We'd be pleased to visit when our schedule permits. The remainder of the dinner proceeded with superficial pleasantries, overlaying mutual assessment. Richard probed delicately for information about Colton's background, while Colton parried the questions with straightforward answers that revealed little beyond what Richard already knew. By the time they returned to Willow Creek that evening, both Colton and Martha were exhausted from the sustained performance. He's planning something, Martha observed, as Colton helped her from the car, maintaining their public facade despite no observers at the private estate. Richard doesn't extend. Olive branches without purpose. Agreed, Colton replied, dropping the pretense once they were inside. The Denver invitation is an evaluation, not a reconciliation. Nevertheless, we'll need to accept eventually. Refusing would only deepen his suspicions. Martha removed her coat, handing it to Mrs. Porter, who had appeared silently in the foyer. That will be all for tonight, Mrs. Porter. Thank you. After the housekeeper departed, Martha gestured toward the library. Nightcap. I think we've earned one after that performance. Colton followed her into the book-lined room, accepting the glass of bourbon she poured him from a crystal decanter. You played your part perfectly. If I didn't know better, I'd still believe you were losing your vision. Years of practice hiding one condition prepared me well for concealing another, Martha replied, pouring herself a smaller measure of the amber liquid. Though the cognitive lapses are harder to disguise than physical limitations. Something in her tone caught Colton's attention. Have there been incidents I haven't noticed? Martha hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yesterday, I found myself in the upstairs hallway, momentarily uncertain why I'd gone there. Only for a few seconds, but she trailed off, taking a small sip of bourbon. It will happen more frequently as time progresses. The clinical detachment with which she discussed her symptoms struck Colton as a shield against the fear she must surely feel. Dr. Mills mentioned strategies that might help, routines, memory aids, environmental adjustments. Yes, I'm implementing those gradually. Martha's tone remained matter-of-fact. The library is already organized by color and subject rather than traditional cataloging. The kitchen items are labeled with their contents, small accommodations that maintain independence longer. Colton nodded, noting these details for the first time. The meticulous preparation was quintessentially Martha, facing an uncontrollable situation with every controllable element precisely arranged. We should discuss the Denver visit, he said, shifting to practical matters. What should I know about Richard's family, his wife, children? Emily is his second wife, 15 years his junior, former gallery curator, now primarily focused on Denver society events. 2 children, Jonathan, 17, heading to Princeton next fall, and Melissa, 14, equestrian enthusiast who may actually appreciate the breeding program here. As Martha continued providing family details with remarkable precision, Colton was struck by the contrast between her perfect recall of long-term memories and the gradual erosion of her short-term functionality. The cruel irony of Alzheimer's, crystal-clear recollection of the distant past alongside increasing fog around the present. Richard will have investigated you thoroughly by now, Martha concluded. Expect detailed questions about your past. particularly any potential vulnerabilities, financial difficulties, previous relationships, legal issues. He won't find much beyond what I've already told you, Colton assured her. My life hasn't been complicated, just occasionally difficult. Martha studied him over the rim of her glass. Everyone has complications, Mr. Hayes. Some are simply better documented than others. The comment hung between them, neither accusation nor question, merely observation. Colton recognized it as Martha's way of offering an opening, should he wish, to elaborate on his past beyond the basic outline he'd provided. I was engaged once, he said after a moment. 10 years ago, Catherine Morgan, daughter of a rancher I worked for near Sheridan. The relationship ended when her father discovered he had other plans for his daughter than a marriage to his hired hand. Martha nodded, unsurprised. And she accepted her father's judgment. She did. I left the next day, moved south to Wyoming. Haven't seen or spoken to her since. A formative disappointment, Martha observed. One that perhaps shaped your subsequent choices. Colton shrugged, uncomfortable with the psychological assessment. It taught me to be realistic about social boundaries. Boundaries that our arrangement conveniently sidesteps, Martha noted with subtle irony, from forbidden suitor to wealthy widow's husband. Quite the reversal of fortune. A temporary reversal, Colton reminded her. Our arrangement has a predetermined conclusion. Indeed it does. Martha set down her glass with finality, which is why emotional entanglements would be particularly ill-advised. The warning seemed unnecessary given the nature of their relationship, but Colton recognized it as Martha's way of maintaining clear boundaries. Understood. Our partnership remains practical, not personal. Precisely. Martha rose, signaling the end of their conversation. Richard leaves tomorrow at noon. I suggest we maintain a low profile until then. His departure should give us at least 2 weeks of relative peace before we need to address the Denver visit. As Martha left the library, Colton remained, finishing his bourbon slowly. The comment about emotional entanglements lingered in his mind. Did Martha sense some shift in his attitude toward her? Had his concern for her welfare translated as something more intimate than their arrangement warranted? He dismissed the thought. Their partnership was founded on mutual benefit and practical necessity, not emotional connection. The growing respect he felt for Martha, her courage in facing her diagnosis, her meticulous planning, her unwavering dignity, was natural given their circumstances. Nothing more. Yet, as he returned to the caretaker's cottage that night, Colton found himself increasingly invested in Martha's welfare beyond the terms of their contract. The realization was unsettling, suggesting complications neither of them had anticipated when entering their arrangement. What he couldn't know then was that Martha's revelation about her health condition, significant as it was, represented only the first layer of truth to be uncovered. In the days ahead, he would discover that Martha Blackwell harbored deeper secrets, ones that would fundamentally alter his understanding of their arrangement and his role in her carefully constructed endgame. The week following Richard's departure passed in relative calm. Colton settled into his role managing Willow Creek Estate with growing confidence, while Martha maintained her usual schedule of correspondence, business calls, and oversight of the breeding program. To the casual observer, nothing had changed in their arrangement, but beneath the surface subtle shifts were occurring. Colton found himself watching Martha more carefully, noting the occasional moments of hesitation when retrieving a name or date, brief pauses most people would never notice, but which now carried greater significance. For her part, Martha seemed to relax marginally in his presence, no longer maintaining the pretense of visual impairment when they were alone. On a crisp morning, 10 days after Richard's departure, Colton was reviewing breeding records in the stable office when Mrs. Porter appeared at the door. "Mr. Hayes, "A delivery has arrived that requires your attention," she announced with uncharacteristic formality. "What sort of delivery?" "Legal documents from Mr. Richards' office in Denver. They're marked confidential, addressed to you personally." Colton frowned. "Did Mrs. Blackwell receive something similar?" "No, sir. Just you." Mrs. Porter's expression conveyed concern without explicitly stating it. "The courier requires your signature." Following her to the main house, Colton found a professionally dressed courier waiting in the foyer with a sealed envelope bearing the letterhead of Chamberlain and Walden, Richards' law firm. "Mr. Hayes?" the courier confirmed. "I need your signature." Acknowledging receipt after signing, Colton waited until the courier departed before opening the envelope. Inside, he found a formal letter requesting his presence at the Denver offices of Chamberlain and Walden in 3 days' time, along with copies of what appeared to be financial statements from a Wyoming bank Colton had never used. "Is there a problem?" Mrs. Porter asked, hovering nearby. "I'm not sure. Where is Mrs. Blackwell?" "In town with Mr. Gregory from the bank. They're reviewing quarterly investment reports." Colton nodded, tucking the documents into his pocket. "When she returns, please let her know I need to speak with her. I'll be checking the north pasture fencing until then." Physical work had always helped Colton think, and the fence repairs provided the perfect outlet for his troubled thoughts. Richard's move made little sense. Why send financial statements from an unfamiliar bank? What did he hope to accomplish with this summons to Denver? By mid-afternoon, Colton returned to find Martha's car in the driveway. He found her in the library, reviewing documents with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. "Ah, Colton." She greeted him. "You remember Harold Gregory from Western Alliance Bank?" "Of course." Colton shook the banker's hand. "Good to see you again." "And you, Mr. Hayes?" "I was just reviewing the quarterly performance with Mrs. Blackwell. The portfolio has shown remarkable resilience despite market fluctuations." After a few more minutes of financial discussion that Colton only partially followed, Gregory gathered his materials and departed, leaving them alone. "Mrs. Porter mentioned you needed to speak with me," Martha said, removing reading glasses she clearly didn't need for vision, but maintained as part of her public persona. "Richard has made another move," Colton replied, removing the documents from his pocket and placing them before her. "These arrived by courier today." Martha examined the letter and financial statements, her expression hardening. "As I suspected, he's investigating your background more thoroughly than a standard employment check." "Those aren't my accounts," Colton said firmly. "I've never used Wyoming First National." "I believe you," Martha replied without hesitation. "This is clearly fabricated evidence, Richard's attempt to create doubt about your character and motives. The question is why? What does he hope to accomplish?" Martha tapped the summons letter thoughtfully. "Isolation and intimidation. By contacting you directly rather than both of us, he's attempting to create division between us. The implication of financial impropriety is meant to put you on the defensive." "Should I go to Denver?" "Absolutely not. That would validate his approach." Martha's tone was decisive. "We'll respond together in writing, requesting any concerns be addressed to both of us through appropriate channels." Colton nodded, relieved by her immediate trust in his integrity. "He's not giving up easily." "Richard has always been tenacious," Martha acknowledged. "It's what makes him successful in business and insufferable in personal matters." As Martha drafted their response to Richard's legal team, Colton found himself studying her more carefully. Despite the significant revelations of the past weeks, he still felt there were aspects of Martha Blackwell he didn't fully understand, depths beneath her carefully controlled exterior that remained unexplored. Later that evening, after they had signed and sent their joint response to Denver via overnight courier, Martha suggested they take coffee in the solarium. The glass-enclosed room was especially beautiful at sunset, the fading light casting long shadows across the winter garden beyond. "Richard's persistence troubles me," she admitted, a rare vulnerability showing in her expression. "Not for my sake, but for the complications it creates for you." "I knew what I was signing up for," Colton reminded her. "Family complications included. Did you?" Martha's gaze was direct. "I wonder sometimes if either of us fully understood what this arrangement would entail." The comment hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Their practical partnership had evolved into something more complex than either had anticipated, not romantic but increasingly personal in ways neither had planned for. "I should check on the pregnant mare," Colton said, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She's getting close." "Of course," Martha nodded, allowing him the retreat. "Let me know if there are any developments." In the stables, Colton found the mare resting comfortably, showing no immediate signs of labor. The familiar environment soothed him, the uncomplicated needs of the animals a welcome contrast to the increasingly complicated human dynamics at the main house. He was checking another horse when he heard footsteps approaching, too heavy for Martha or Mrs. Porter. Turning, he was surprised to find Sheriff Dawson standing in the stable doorway. "Evening, Hayes," the sheriff greeted him. "Got a minute?" "Sheriff," Colton acknowledged, instantly alert. "Something wrong?" "Might be. Mind stepping outside?" In the yard, illuminated by security lights against the deepening dusk, Dawson's expression was grave. "Got an interesting call today from the Wyoming State Banking Commission. Seems someone's been making inquiries about accounts supposedly belonging to you at First National." Colton's wariness increased. "I don't have accounts there." "That's what I told them. Know you long enough to be pretty familiar with your financial situation." Dawson's weathered face showed concern. "Thing is, these inquiries came with documentation. Forged. Documents suggesting you've been moving substantial sums through those accounts over the past month." "That's impossible. I haven't—" "I know that," Dawson interrupted. "Question is, who's trying to make it look like you have and why?" Colton hesitated, weighing his response carefully. "I have some ideas. Martha's nephew isn't entirely supportive of our marriage." "Richard Blackwell," Dawson nodded. "Man has connections in Denver banking circles. Could probably arrange something like this." "Would this be considered criminal? Forging banking documents?" "Potentially, though it gets complicated with interstate banking regulations. More importantly, it suggests he's willing to go to extreme lengths to discredit you." The sheriff studied Colton carefully. "You sure you know what you've gotten yourself into with the Blackwells, Hayes?" The question echoed Colton's own doubts. "I'm beginning to wonder. Martha's been straightforward with me, but Richard's intervention complicates things." Dawson sighed. "Martha Blackwell's a formidable woman, always has been. But family disputes like this can get ugly fast." He handed Colton a business card. "Banking Commission investigators' contact information. He'll want to speak with you directly to clear this up." After the sheriff departed, Colton remained in the stable yard, staring at the card in his hand. Richard's tactics had escalated from legal challenges to potential fraud, a significant and troubling development. When he finally returned to the main house, he found Martha still in the solarium, though the sunset had long faded to darkness. She looked up as he entered, immediately sensing his tension. "What's happened?" she asked. Colton explained Sheriff Dawson's visit and the forged banking documents, watching carefully for her reaction. To his surprise, Martha appeared more resigned than shocked. "I underestimated Richard's determination," she said quietly, "or perhaps overestimated his ethical boundaries." "This goes beyond family concern," Colton pointed out. "Forging financial records is potentially criminal and nearly impossible to prove, particularly given his connections." Martha shook her head. "Richard has always believed the ends justify the means, especially when he's convinced he's right. We Need to address this directly, Colton insisted. If he's willing to fabricate evidence, what might he do next? Martha was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing options in her mind. Finally, she met his gaze with renewed resolve. You're right. This requires a more direct approach. She reached for the house phone on the side table. It's time I spoke with Emily, Richard's wife. Will she have any influence? More than you might imagine. Emily has always been the moderating force in their marriage. Richard respects her judgment, even when it contradicts his own. The call was brief, but intense, with Martha explaining the situation in measured tones that nonetheless conveyed the seriousness of the circumstances. When she hung up, her expression showed cautious optimism. Emily was unaware of Richard's actions. She's disturbed by the escalation and has promised to intervene. Can she be trusted? In this, yes. Emily has a strong moral compass and legitimate concern for family harmony. She also has significant influence through her family's connections to the bank's board of directors. Colton wasn't entirely convinced, but nodded acknowledgement. And in the meantime, we document everything, every communication, every unusual occurrence, and we accelerate our preparations for managing my condition in case Richard's actions force our timeline. The implications were clear. Martha feared her nephew might succeed in challenging her autonomy sooner than they had planned for. The thought of it clearly troubled her deeply, an unusual crack in her normally composed demeanor. We won't let that happen, Colton assured her, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Whatever it takes, you'll remain in control of your life and home for as long as possible. Martha studied him, something unreadable in her expression. Your commitment goes beyond our arrangement, doesn't it? The question caught him off guard. I suppose it does. Your dignity matters to me, not just because of our contract. Curious, she mused. Neither of us anticipated that, I think. Before Colton could respond, Mrs. Porter appeared in the doorway, her usually stoic expression replaced by agitation. Ma'am, there's a call from the Cheyenne Hospital. It's about Mr. Richard. He's been in an accident on his way back from Denver. Martha rose immediately. How serious? They wouldn't provide details over the phone, ma'am. Only that he's in surgery and you're listed as his emergency contact. Martha turned to Colton, her decision immediate. We need to go to Cheyenne. Now. The 3-hour drive to Cheyenne Regional Medical Center was tense and largely silent. Martha made several calls to Emily, who was arranging a flight from Denver, to Richard's office to inform his partners, and finally to her attorney to discuss potential medical decisions she might need to make as Richard's closest relative in proximity. At the hospital, they were directed to the surgical waiting area where a somber-faced doctor met them. Mrs. Blackwell? I'm Dr. Winters, the attending trauma surgeon. How is he? Martha asked, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. Stable, but critical. Mr. Blackwell suffered multiple injuries when his vehicle left the highway, broken ribs, punctured lung, and significant head trauma. We've relieved the intracranial pressure, but he remains unconscious. Prognosis? 2. Early to say, definitively. The next 24-48 hours will be crucial. Dr. Winters hesitated. You should prepare for the possibility of difficult decisions ahead. As the doctor departed, Martha sat heavily in a waiting room chair, the implications settling over her. Despite their differences, Richard was family, her only living blood relative. The potential loss clearly affected her deeply. Colton sat beside her, unsure what comfort he could offer. Emily should arrive within a few hours. Would you like me to arrange accommodations nearby? Martha nodded absently, her mind clearly elsewhere. This changes everything, she murmured almost to herself. If Richard doesn't recover fully... She didn't complete the thought, but Colton understood the implications. Richard's accident dramatically altered their situation. removing the immediate threat to Martha's independence while potentially creating new complications if she needed to assume responsibility for his care or business affairs. As they settled in for the long night ahead, Colton realized that once again the parameters of their arrangement were shifting in ways neither could have anticipated. What had begun as a simple exchange, shelter and security for assistance and protection, had evolved into a complex partnership facing increasingly complicated challenges. And through it all, the sense persisted that Martha still held secrets she hadn't shared, pieces of the puzzle that might explain Richard's extreme actions and the true nature of the family dynamics he had married into. The sterile hospital corridor became their world for the next 48 hours. Martha maintained her vigil with remarkable stamina, speaking with doctors, conferring with Emily, who arrived haggard and fearful on a late-night flight from Denver, and making necessary arrangements with Richard's business associates, who appeared in rotating shifts of grave-faced men in expensive suits. Colton remained a steady presence, handling practical matters, securing hotel rooms, ensuring Martha ate and rested when possible, and providing the quiet support she clearly needed but wouldn't explicitly request. Their marriage of convenience had never been more thoroughly tested or more genuinely expressed than in this crisis. Late on the second night, with Richard still unconscious but showing improved vital signs, Colton convinced Martha to return to their hotel room for a few hours of proper rest. Emily would call immediately if there was any change. In the privacy of the hotel suite, Martha finally allowed her exhaustion to show, sinking onto the sofa with uncharacteristic heaviness. "You should sleep," Colton suggested gently. "There's nothing more to be done tonight." "I know." She rubbed her temples, signs of strain evident in the tightness around her eyes. "It's just, this situation has complicated everything." "Richard will recover," Colton said with more confidence than the doctors had expressed. "His condition is improving." "Yes, but he'll likely face a lengthy rehabilitation, cognitive assessment, possibly long-term care." Martha's gaze was distant, calculating. "The irony isn't lost on me. He was so concerned about my capacity, and now—" She trailed off, but Colton understood the unspoken implication. The power dynamic between Martha and her nephew had shifted dramatically, potentially placing her in the caregiving role he had tried to force upon her. "Emily seems capable," Colton observed. "She's handling the situation well." Emily has always been the stronger one in their marriage, though Richard would never admit it. Martha's expression softened slightly. "She was kind enough to express concern for you, given the circumstances." It was true. Despite her obvious distress over her husband's condition, Emily had made a point of acknowledging Colton's support and expressing regret over Richard's recent actions, which she claimed to have been unaware of until Martha's call. "She seems genuine," Colton agreed. "Unlike Richard, she actually looked at me when speaking, not through me." "Social training," Martha explained. "Emily comes from old Boston money. Proper manners are ingrained, regardless of personal feelings." She paused, then added, "Though in her case, I believe the courtesy is sincere." Colton hesitated, then decided the moment was right for a question that had been troubling him. "Martha, why did Richard escalate to forgery? It seems extreme even, given his concerns about our marriage." Martha was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed deeply. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted. "Something that explains Richard's desperation, if not his methods." Colton tensed, preparing for yet another revelation that would alter their arrangement. "I'm listening." "Richard's financial situation isn't what it appears to be," Martha began. 3 years ago, his investment firm made a series of increasingly risky ventures that eventually collapsed. He faced potential bankruptcy and professional disgrace. Let me guess, You bailed him out. Martha nodded. James always treated Richard like a son. I couldn't let his legacy be destroyed by Richard's poor judgment. I provided substantial funds, nearly $30 million, structured as loans through holding companies to avoid public knowledge of his failures. Colton whistled softly. The amount was staggering, far beyond what he'd imagined, even knowing Martha's wealth. And the terms of these loans? Generous, but not without conditions. The primary stipulation was that I would retain complete control of my affairs and estate planning. Richard agreed readily at the time, desperate for the rescue. Understanding dawned. But now your Alzheimer's diagnosis threatens that arrangement. If you're declared incompetent, the loans could potentially be restructured or even forgiven. Entirely. If Richard gained control as my guardian, Martha confirmed, my medical condition created an unexpected opportunity for him to escape financial obligations he struggled to meet. That explains the urgency and the extreme tactics, Colton said, pieces finally falling into place. He's not just concerned about your welfare, he's fighting for his financial survival. Yes, Richard has always been ambitious, but not usually. Unethical. Desperation changes people. Martha's expression showed a complex mixture of disappointment and understanding. I should have told you sooner, but these financial arrangements were confidential. I wasn't certain how much you needed to know. It would have helped to understand what we were really facing, Colton pointed out, unable to keep a hint of frustration from his voice. You're right, Martha acknowledged. I've developed habits of privacy that don't serve our partnership well. Another adjustment I need to make. The candid admission surprised Colton. Martha rarely acknowledged error or expressed vulnerability, particularly regarding her decision-making. So what happens now? He asked. With Richard incapacitated, at least temporarily? The immediate threat to our arrangement is neutralized, Martha replied, practical as always. But new complications arise. Emily will need support managing their affairs during Richard's recovery. The children will require stability, and I may need to take a more active role in the family businesses temporarily. All while managing your own condition, Colton added quietly. Yes, the timing is challenging. Martha looked suddenly older, the weight of these overlapping responsibilities evident in her posture. I had hoped for more time before my cognitive decline became significant. Colton moved to sit beside her on the sofa, closer than their usual careful distance. You don't have to manage everything alone, Martha. That's the whole point of our arrangement, isn't it? She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Our arrangement has evolved beyond its original parameters, hasn't it? I think it has, he agreed, for both of us. Before Martha could respond, her phone rang. Emily, calling from the hospital. Richard had regained consciousness briefly and was responding to basic commands. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. After the call, Martha's relief was palpable. They'll run cognitive assessments tomorrow, but this is encouraging news. It is, Colton agreed. You should try to sleep now. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Martha nodded, rising with visible exhaustion. At the door to her bedroom, she paused. Thank you, Colton. Your support these past days has been more meaningful than our contract required. That's what partners do, he replied simply. The next morning brought cautious optimism from Richard's medical team. Though still seriously injured, he was now conscious for longer periods and demonstrating good cognitive function despite the head trauma. Recovery would be lengthy, but the prognosis had improved significantly. Emily met with them in the hospital cafeteria, her elegant features showing the strain of sleepless nights, but her composure intact. The doctors are encouraged, she reported, cupping a mug of hospital coffee between manicured hands. The neurological tests show no significant impairment so far. That's excellent news, Martha said sincerely. Emily nodded. then fixed her gaze on Colton with unexpected directness. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Hayes. I was aware of Richard's concerns about your marriage, but not the extent of his actions. The forged documents—" She shook her head in dismay. "That crosses a line I would never have condoned." "I appreciate that," Colton replied, believing her sincerity. "My concern has always been protecting Martha's right to make her own choices." "As it should be." Emily glanced toward Martha with genuine affection. "Aunt Martha has been the family's cornerstone since Uncle James passed. Richard's protective instincts, while well-intentioned, sometimes manifest as control." Martha smiled, faintly. "A diplomatic assessment, Emily, always the peacemaker. Someone in this family has to be." Emily's attempt at lightness faded quickly. "Richard mentioned your name when he woke briefly last night. He seemed concerned, almost apologetic. I think this experience may have shifted his perspective." "Near-death experiences often do," Martha observed, "though I'll reserve judgment on any lasting change until he's fully recovered." After finalizing arrangements for Richard's ongoing care and Martha's involvement in family matters during his recovery, they prepared to return to Willow Creek. The immediate crisis had passed, but significant challenges remained: managing Richard's business interests temporarily, supporting Emily and the children, all while navigating Martha's own progressing condition. As they drove back through the Wyoming landscape, winter giving way to early signs of spring in greening hillsides and swollen creeks, Colton sensed Martha was deep in thought. "You're quiet," he observed after nearly an hour of silence. "I'm reassessing," she replied. "These past days have clarified certain priorities." "Such as?" Martha turned slightly to face him. "I need to make modifications to our arrangement, Colton. Recent events have demonstrated vulnerabilities in my planning." "What kind of modifications?" "For one, you need greater legal authority sooner than I anticipated. Healthcare proxy, financial power of attorney. The documents are prepared but not yet executed. That needs to change immediately." Colton nodded, understanding the practical necessity given recent events. And I believe we need to reconsider the nature of our partnership." Martha's tone was measured, almost clinical. "The challenges ahead will require a deeper level of trust and cooperation than we initially established." "I thought we were already moving in that direction," Colton said carefully. "We are, but informally. I'm suggesting we acknowledge evolution explicitly." Martha's gaze was direct. "Our marriage was conceived as a business arrangement with clear boundaries and expectations. Those boundaries have shifted." Colton kept his eyes on the road, processing her words. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A renegotiation of terms. One that recognizes the personal commitment you've demonstrated, goes beyond our contract, and compensates accordingly." The suggestion caught him off guard. "Martha, I'm not looking for additional compensation." "Perhaps not, but fairness demands it. Your role has expanded considerably, from estate manager to confidant, advocate, and now potentially business partner as we navigate Richard's recovery and my condition." Colton frowned slightly. Quantifying this feel wrong somehow. "Because the arrangement has developed personal dimensions," Martha acknowledged with surprising candor. "That doesn't negate the practical aspects. You've committed to supporting me through challenging circumstances. That commitment deserves recognition." As they approached Willow Creek Estate, Colton finally responded, "I'll consider your proposal, but I'm not comfortable discussing financial adjustments right now. Let's focus on getting you home and settled first." Martha accepted this with a nod. A reasonable approach. We have time. But time, as they both knew, was the one commodity Martha's condition made increasingly precious. Back at Willow Creek, they were greeted by Mrs. Porter, who had managed the estate efficiently in their absence. Life resumed its rhythm. Colton overseeing the spring breeding season, Martha balancing estate management with new responsibilities, helping Emily navigate Richard's business affairs during his recovery. 2 weeks after their return, on a mild spring morning with the first wildflowers dotting the pastures, Colton found Martha in the garden, supervising the planting of new rose bushes. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "The Jensen auction catalogue arrived," he reported. "3 of our yearlings are featured prominently." "Excellent. That should attract the right buyers." Colton hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about your proposal." Martha's expression remained neutral, but her attention sharpened. "And I'm not interested in renegotiating financial terms," he said firmly. "The compensation you've already provided is more than generous." "I see." Something like disappointment flickered in her eyes. "May I ask why?" Colton struggled to articulate, feelings he was still coming to terms with himself. "Putting a price on whatever this has become between us feels wrong. Our arrangement started as a transaction, but it's evolved into something more complex, something that can't be quantified in dollar amounts." "A partnership," Martha suggested. "Yes, but not just in the business sense." Martha considered this, removing her gardening gloves deliberately. "You're proposing we simply allow our arrangement to evolve naturally, without formal redefinition." "I am." Colton met her gaze directly. "I made a commitment when I married you, Martha. The circumstances were unusual, the motivations practical, but the commitment itself was real. I'll honor that, regardless of how our situation changes." For a moment, Martha's carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing genuine emotion in her eyes. "That's not what I expected." "It surprised me too," Colton admitted with a slight smile, "but these past weeks have made one thing clear. I'm invested in your welfare beyond any contract. I want to see you through whatever comes next, not because I'm obligated, but because I choose to." Martha was silent for a long moment, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice held a warmth he rarely heard. "In that case, I accept your terms, Mr. Hayes. We'll proceed as partners, in the fullest sense." The simple exchange marked a turning point in their relationship, an acknowledgement that what had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither had anticipated. A genuine partnership founded on mutual respect, shared purpose, and perhaps most surprisingly, a deep personal connection that transcended their practical arrangement. As spring bloomed fully across Willow Creek Estate, bringing new foals to the breeding program and renewed activity to the land, Colton and Martha settled into their evolved relationship with the same practical approach that had characterized their initial arrangement. They faced the challenges of Martha's condition together, implementing systems and supports to maintain her independence as long as possible, while preparing realistically for the progression to come. Richard's recovery progressed slowly but steadily, and with it came an unexpected shift in family dynamics. The near-death experience had indeed altered his perspective, as Emily had suggested. While he maintained concerns about Martha's condition, his approach softened considerably. When finally told of her Alzheimer's diagnosis during a carefully planned family meeting 3 months after his accident, his response was compassion rather than control. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked Martha, the question holding genuine hurt rather than accusation. "Because I feared you would use it to take over my life rather than support my choices," she replied honestly. Richard had absorbed this with uncharacteristic humility. "I've given you reason to fear that. I'm sorry, Aunt Martha. The reconciliation wasn't immediate or complete. Too much had transpired for simple resolution, but it marked the beginning of healing in the family." Richard's financial obligations to Martha remained, but with new arrangements that acknowledged both his recovery needs and her progressive condition. Through it all, Colton remained steadfast, his initial desperation and financial need long since replaced by genuine commitment to the unusual family he had joined. The starving cowhand, who had married a 72-year-old widow for shelter, had found something he'd never expected: purpose, connection, and a place where he truly belonged. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Willow Creek Valley in gold and crimson, Martha took Colton's hand, a rare physical gesture that spoke volumes. "I've been thinking about how strange life's paths can be," she said thoughtfully. "If you hadn't been desperate for work that day, if I hadn't received my diagnosis, if Sheriff Dawson hadn't suggested you—" A series of unfortunate circumstances that led to something neither of us expected. Colton completed her thought. Martha nodded. "The most genuine things sometimes grow from the most artificial beginnings." As they sat in companionable silence, watching daylight fade into dusk, both acknowledged the truth without needing to speak it aloud. Their marriage of convenience had become the most authentic relationship either had known. A partnership forged in necessity but sustained by choice, facing an uncertain future with shared strength and purpose. Their story had no fairy tale ending. Martha's condition would progress inevitably, bringing challenges neither could fully prepare for. But they would face those challenges together, their unusual beginning having evolved into something rare and precious, a bond stronger than convenience, more enduring than contract, and more valuable than any inheritance. The starving cowhand had indeed discovered the bank owner's widow's real identity, not just as a wealthy woman with a progressive condition, but as a formidable partner worthy of his loyalty, respect, and ultimately his heart. And in that discovery, he had also found himself, no longer defined by desperation or circumstance, but by the choice to honor a commitment that had transformed them both. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.